Chapter 7. Mike. Mike's biggest concern about trying to put together a group of rebel fighters pulled from the ranks of one of the most anti-gun counties in arguably the most anti-gun state in the Union was who he'd need to make contact with to get the ball rolling. In the past, his work had taken him to the mountains of Afghanistan, where every single village was overseen by an elder who was clearly in charge and able to make decisions for the village in its entirety. In California, there were mayors of cities, but other than the largest cities such as San Jose, San Francisco, and Sacramento, the mayors of these smaller towns wielded little to no power. These political stations were rarely full-time and, in fact, were in place more as a formality than anything else. The city managers were usually the real players in the smaller towns. They wielded the power to hire and fire police chiefs and other heads of the city's many departments. Mike knew he and Tim would make adjustments on the fly based on what they found when they entered Petaluma. The briefing Mike received on the city read as though the pencil-necked intel weenie delivering the briefing was reading the information off the city's Wikipedia page. He'd cited the city manager along with the mayor, the government type, which was a city council, and then had thrown in the town's elevation, 30 feet above sea level. Like that mattered. His wasn't to question why. His was to do or die. That was the mindset needed to endure some of the harebrained missions he'd been tasked with during his career in the Army. They moved cautiously through the terrain, heading in the general direction of the city limits. When they reached the end of the countryside and were about to enter the built-up neighborhoods, they stopped and changed into civilian attire to better blend in. Both retained their weapons, 2 M4 rifles and 2 Glock 9mm pistols in holsters attached at the hip. They kept their body armor on under loose-fitting flannel shirts pulled over their military BDUs, making them appear large and bulky. Both guys were large and muscular, just not quite as filled out as their equipment made them look. They received more than one sidelong stare as they walked down the sidewalks, transitioning through several neighborhoods. California wasn't known for its latitude in gun ownership, so the sight of 2 heavily armed guys walking down the street had people stopping in their tracks to gape at the 2 dangerous-looking men. Along the way, they'd stop to fill their water bottles from hoses in the front yards of homes that appeared vacant. The 2 Green Berets had also taken half an hour to sit and eat a freeze-dried meal before they pushed deeper into the city. More than once, a person would ask a question of them, and they'd just shrug and keep moving. They would both nod politely and refrain from conversations with anyone when they could help it. After walking through neighborhoods for what seemed like an eternity, they arrived in the downtown area. The city building was located at 11 English Street, which was still more than a dozen blocks from where the 2 Green Berets entered the town. Mike lamented the lack of a working quad, ATV, or even a horse, for crying out loud. Block after block they walked, seeing fewer people once the homes gave way to businesses. A couple of the small stores were open, their owner standing out front, eyeing the 2 Green Berets warily as they continued on, paying the business owners no attention. At last, they reached 11 English Street. To Mike's surprise, the city building was a smallish single-story building, most likely built in the 1980s, judging by its plain, brown brick, Soviet-style architect. A walkway led up to what appeared to be the front doors, which were dark from where Mike stood. When they reached the doors, Mike pushed, and again, to his surprise, the glass door swung inward. Inside the lobby was an unmanned information desk and a couple of bathrooms along a wall to their left. To their right, and down a short hallway, Mike could hear soft voices, so he turned and strode in that direction. The voices emanated from behind 2 solid wood doors, marked with the words, City Council Chamber. The words were stenciled above the doorframe, letting Mike know things were going on where things usually went on. He pulled one of the large wooden doors open and saw 10 people hunched over a table lit by several candles. On the tabletop were maps, graphs, and all manner of booklets and pamphlets. Mike could only guess the litany of booklets and brochures were part of an emergency action system they'd never read that outlined what to do in case everything went to hell. He almost laughed out loud when he considered the fact that whatever civilian doomsday plan they may have drawn up and printed out held absolutely no relevance to their current situation, and they didn't even know it yet. The bodies would be stacked chest high before these folks realized they were in way over their heads, and no strategic plan fabricated by someone on their second career, probably hailing from fire or law enforcement, was going to stop what was coming. When Mike opened the door fully, everyone at the table looked up to see who the newcomers were. At the sight of two heavily armed men, several people huddled over the tabletop shrank away. One tired-looking man of about 50, who wore suit pants and a white button-up shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, was armed with a pistol on his right hip. Mike pegged him as the city's chief of police. "Can we help you?" the armed man asked, his voice bereft of patience. Mike moved forward. "Maybe. My name's Captain Mike Blakey, and I'm here at the behest of the United States government, because you are about to have a big problem." A woman, who hadn't shrunk away when the two soldiers appeared in the doorway, spoke up. "You're with the military?" she asked, an air of authority in her tone. Mike locked eyes with the woman. She didn't flinch. "And you are?" "Roberta Maddox, city manager." Roberta moved around the side of the table so that she faced the two newcomers, her hands on her hips. "What exactly is the government doing about this power issue? We have a list of essentials the city needs before we see more deaths." Mike shot Tim a quick look to tell him to be ready for anything. What he was about to broach with the tired-looking group of city officials might not go over all that well. "Yeah, that's not really why we're here. See, America's at war, and our mission is to recruit a militia from the ranks of those living in and around Petaluma, train them how to fight, and then begin supply chain disruption operations against an invading and hostile foreign force." Mike let his truth bomb hang in the air for a moment. Stunned, Roberta looked at Mike in disbelief, head cocked slightly, evidence that her veneer of authority was cracking a bit. The action also revealed her inability to hide her body language. "There is no hostile force in Petaluma. What in God's name are you talking about? Are you two even with the military?" she demanded, giving both Green Berets a disapproving once-over. "Roberta, let me handle this," the armed man said, stepping forward. "Fellas, those weapons don't look like they're Cal-compliant, so I'm going to need some ID." As the man pressed forward, Tim shifted to the left, and he and Mike hefted their rifles at the advancing man in unison. "Everyone just take a chill pill," Mike snapped. "Let me be very clear. Coming to you all first was done out of respect, on the off chance you guys are connected to the community you serve." He let that sink in for a second before continuing. "We are authorized by our command to use deadly force in the commission of our duties. We don't want to, but I'll be damned if anyone's getting in our way. Another thing, we don't have a thing to offer you. Those days are gone. America's on her knees if you hadn't realized already." The armed man stopped as soon as the rifles were leveled at him, staring dumbfoundedly at the two broad-shouldered men barking at the group about war and foreign invaders. "We need proof of who you are," he said lamely. Mike took 2 swift steps forward, placed himself directly in front of the meddlesome man with the pistol, and shoved his rifle sideways into the man's face. "See that? It says property of the U.S. government, and the selector has a full auto setting, so hopefully that clears things up for you. I'm with the United States military, and no, the rifle is not California compliant, although I don't think that matters anymore." Roberta broke in. "Listen, we need help. We've had 200 deaths at the hospital and several elderly care facilities, and those are only the ones we've been notified about. We're in bad shape here." Mike turned away from the armed man, knowing Tim would skullcap the guy if he drew on Mike with his back turned. "Roberta, right?" She nodded calmly. "The government has nothing to give right now. We're all going to be fighting for our country within the next few days. You all will have to find alternate methods to feed your communities, not to mention the water and ammo needed to stop what's coming. I need men and equipment, stuff like older vehicles that may still run, or quad-type ATVs, stuff like that. I also need every single round of ammunition the city can scrounge up. He swung his attention back to the chief of police. I'm guessing you're the top cop here, right? The man eyed Mike for a long moment before replying. I am. Chief Clarity. Randall Clarity. Great, Chief. We need your men, especially guys trained in SWAT or dudes with prior military service, and I ain't talking about some Air Force goon who flew a desk during the war. I'll need guys who were in country and in the fight. Clarity shook his head, a look of amusement on his face. Ha! That's a good one, soldier, but my guys are going to be keeping whatever law and order we can. I'll be doing this with a few who I'm even able to reach, not running around the countryside playing army with you and your friend, he chastised. Mike had heard enough from the man and decided to send a message. He lashed a foot out at Clarity's left femur and blew the chief of police back and doubled him over. It also spun the man's right hip in line with Mike's lunging hands. Before Clarity could recover, he was disarmed and hobbled with a badly aching left thigh. Mike stuffed Clarity's weapon into his vest and pivoted to face Roberta. He's fired. I can't have that weakness interfering with our efforts to stop China or whoever is headed our way from seizing control of the entire state. I can't, and I won't have it. Roberta stood stunned after she saw how easily the Green Beret had neutered her top cop. Slowly, anger and fear crept into her expression. Despite that, her voice was firm. Mr. Blakey, we will not stand by while you brutalize our police chief. What you've done here is a crime, and rest assured, you will be held accountable. Mike thought briefly about more violence, but couched the idea instead, asking everyone to sit and listen for a moment longer. When the group was seated, he began. America is at war, which means my ROEs. Nobody's face registered any understanding of that acronym, so he explained. My rules of engagement are wide open. You are all Americans here, and I wouldn't think of hurting any of you. But if you try to interfere with what the government is asking me to do, well, Mike held his hand out toward the chief. Interfere, and you're on the same level as any other foreign actor. When no one spoke, he elaborated. I don't want to shoot anybody. It's bad for morale, and it means there's one less person to help in the war effort. Be warned, though. If any one of you pull the crap the chief pulled a minute ago, you're in a world of trouble. The entire group sat stone-faced, including Chief Clarity, who wasn't able to fully digest what the maniac in front of him was saying. He needed a drink and some time to sit and think, maybe discuss it with his second-in-command or perhaps even talk to Roberta in a sidebar. When the war ends and things go back to normal, if they ever do, you can rehire Randall and pick up right where you left off before I came through those doors. Mike gave an apologetic twitch of his shoulders. But for now, this is how it's going to be. Roberta's measured voice broke the silence that followed. Mr. Blakey, why don't you tell us everything you know about what's going on so we can better make choices? I don't like making decisions for our community based on a 5-minute demand session orchestrated by, let's say, a well-intentioned soldier whom we've only just met. The two Green Berets exchanged looks, and Tim nodded his agreement. Fair enough. For the next 30 minutes, Mike regurgitated the lackluster briefing he'd received from the so-called intelligence group. When he finished, he fielded a few questions, none from Clarity, whose ego was far too bruised to show any interest in what the Green Beret was talking about. After the question and answer session, Roberta asked the Green Berets to give the group 10 minutes to speak in private. Mike agreed, and the two Green Berets exited the chambers to wait in the lobby. Keep an eye out front in case our copper in there sneaks out the back and tries something with a couple of his guys, Mike warned, as the two took up positions from which they could cover all the entrances into the building, including the doors to the city council chambers. You went kind of rough on them in there, Mikey, Tim ventured. They needed it. Not judging, just saying they're Americans, soft and scared, probably used to issuing orders, not taking them. Mike relaxed his shoulders, letting out a tension-filled breath. I know, bro. It sucks. But we don't have time to dance around with someone like the chief in there who's probably never been punched in the face, let alone been in a gunfight. Tim was silent for a minute, peering out the windows at the landscaped front of the building. Soon, the vegetation would die off in the absence of a functioning irrigation system, and that wouldn't be all that would be dying off. We need to bring these people along. Remember that, Mike. They aren't the village fighters we've worked with in the past. These folks are fish out of water. We need to show them the way. Mike knew his partner was right, but he was impatient after the pushback he'd received from almost everyone in the city council chambers, including the only paramilitary guy in there, who in his opinion should have been raring to go. He guessed the softening of America's law enforcement agencies started in the 1990s with the stickers and stuffed animals cops carried around handing out to children instead of cracking skulls and taking bad guys to jail. Although he saw nothing wrong with finding ways to connect with the children, Mike realized it was the first step towards moving police away from their primary mission, which was to enforce the laws of the land. The recent demonization of law enforcement only served to weaken the profession further, causing entire teams of cops to sit in their vehicles doing nothing for entire 12-hour shifts unless they were dispatched to a call. One had only to look at the crime rates across America to recognize that what was going on with so-called police reform wasn't working. People in New York would scream, yell, and even burn down their own towns because of a police officer's conduct 3,000 miles away in California, which had absolutely nothing to do with their community. Meanwhile, each and every weekend, people from their own communities would kill a dozen of their fellow citizens, and no one cared. They were too busy pointing out the faults of others thousands of miles away from their own crime-infested districts. Mike's opinion was that chaos bred fear, and a fearful society was more easily controlled by those in power. Sure, America was free as long as the people did whatever their televisions and cell phones told them to do. The elite, whoever they were, had poured fuel on the fear fires, and then more recently set about dividing the country by creating a culture of intolerance. It was the classic divide and conquer tactic used for thousands of years, and it had weakened the entire country, not just law enforcement. Now, Mike was dealing with the remnants of a once great profession, trying his best to draw from its ranks and perform a mission he'd have fretted about even with a group of highly trained special forces guys like Tim and himself. This was the life he chose, and he'd embrace it on the good days and the bad. Sitting in the lobby of an American city building, worried about being ambushed, Mike had to label this day as a bad one, and knew there'd be many more.